Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, my precious pack, and welcome back once more to Vega Conflict. I wanted to start a little discussion here on the channel, specifically about the upcoming tier, the new tier, the next, well, not the next tier, but the next faction. As well as a few guesses at what I think they're going to be like, as well as what the first ship may be, things like that. Well, we don't have to guess what the first ship will be. Most of us should already know what it will be by now, based on how vessels are released. But let's talk about the other two first, the first two Tier 7 factions, and then we'll talk about the third. We'll start off with the Altair Eames, because supposedly, as long as it all goes as planned, they're supposed to be the counter to the third Tier 7 faction. And this new faction is going to counter Umbra. I believe I already know exactly what their damage type is going to be, and anyone else that just looks at the stats of all the ships should recognize it as well. And that means they're most likely going to be doing plasma damage, because the Altarians are naturally resistant to plasma. They're most likely going to get a damage buff against the new group after they come out. And that is the reason I said they're most likely going to be dealing with plasma weaponry, similar to how the Altarians and previously all had alien. The Umbra has no resistance against plasma damage. So how they're going to be countered is through plasma damage of a high variety, similar to the Blight weaponry. I do hope that they don't actually continue with the reusable items and actually change it to instances like this. Level 1 energy weapon, level 2 energy weapon, level 3 energy weapon, which is a reusable item, so you get the first two, but then you have to work for the third one. Level 1 plasma weapon, level 2 plasma weapon, level 2 could be the equivalent of the improved version, but it's reusable, so we do have the blueprint to at least work with. That would be a much better system in my eyes than the system they currently have, where you effectively have to grind for everything. If you want the better weapons, you should have to grind, but there should be some type of base version available for mass production of tier 2 to 3 ships. I mean, Mark 2 to 3 ships. And the reason the plasma damage is, as I said, Umbra has no resistance to it. Altarians, when they're Mark 5 and above, or Mark 4 and above, I can't remember which one they get the additional 10% resistance at, they get 50% off plasma damage. So naturally, they're most likely going to be dealing with plasma weaponry, so anyone who has the Altarian faction, I advise you to start preparing your ships for next month, if they don't continue the Umbra faction with a carrier, which I hope they don't, because the Umbra faction has been given its 5 ships, starting with the Phoenix frigate, which had extremely low build requirements, so everyone could step into the Umbra tier and use their weapons and things like that on that single ship. It also featured extremely high health and other things like that, especially as you mark upgrade it, and it was great at hunting carriers by default, but became even better if they were equipped with a field. Okay, now with that out of the way, let's just try and guess at what the next faction will be. Let's go ahead and let's take a look back at the end message that we received from the end of Catalyst. Okay, here we are once again taking a look at it. We've already read through it, so we can start trying to break it down and figure it out. Now, this is going to be interesting, because again, as I stated, it seems to be around the idea that I stated before of a machine faction with no crews on board, that instead of being thrown through a slingshot, they're being phased in, which to me indicates short-range teleportation or long-range warping or teleportation, or just purely the manipulation of matter as it exists to move it from one location to another in the form of energy. Or I'm overthinking that, and it's actually something entirely different. But from what we see, then machines phased in using technology I've never encountered. So we're either going to get plasma damage for them, or we're actually going to see a new damage type just for this new faction that Umbra has no resistance to. But that doesn't mean that the Altarians would be able to counter it if it's a new damage type, and that's why I ruled out a new damage type and went with plasma, because Umbra was supposed to be countered by Tier C, and Tier C was supposed to be countered by Tier A, and Altarians having high plasma resistance, it would make sense for the targets to use plasma weaponry. As for the technology that they've never used, or that she's never encountered, well, let's think on that for a minute. if any number of people recall they wanted to give us the ability to repair fleets in sector for coins or something like that. It never happened, just like a lot of things. No daily missions rework or anything like that. They could do that with this tier, with them being able to repair in sector via passive repair buff, because if they are going to be a machine faction and have no souls aboard the ships, no people, no Altarians, no anything living, they could store an extremely large number of resources aboard the vessels to repair themselves. They could store additional plates and things like that, and as the ships are damaged after combat, they could begin an auto repair feature that continues even if you dock them, so you could effectively repair any ship tier before them and anything like that. And that would make sense if they're going to be a robotic faction. How would you counter Umbra? You'd have ships that theoretically cannot die, even if they're destroyed right down to the smallest portion of the ship left and it can't fight. So long as it has enough resources aboard that small section of the ship that is left, it could begin repairing, rebuilding, and continue fighting. That doesn't mean that they would come back from the dead in the fight. But that also means that they could have some very interesting overdrives looking at it from that perspective, because they could have highly advanced repair systems that after they lose their shielding or something like that. And yes, I do think the new tier will have shielding, but I think they'll have a different variant of shielding that we've most likely never encountered before. Such as potentially shielding that it blocks all damage types to a degree weaker than specified shields such as plasma, alien, and things like that. But the shield also has passive buffs for the ship that we'll probably have to wait and see what they have. And again, these are all guesses and stuff like that, and this is the point of this video. It's a discussion to talk about the new tier that we don't have yet, and just guess at everything. But back onto the topic that they are machines. If so, we wouldn't have to worry, and this would be able to actually cut production time down, because you wouldn't have to produce primary walkways and things within the vessel for humans, maintenance crews, or anything like that. If it's all automated, they could be much, much smaller, and they could have trolley systems or tram systems or trainway system within these ships that carry ammunition to specified locations where automated processes reload weaponry, charge weapons, or in this case, ferry repair materials throughout the vessel to automated repair systems to be able to start repairing the external hull of the ship if it's received excessive damage. As for the technology they may be using, that is actually interesting, because when I think of a robotic vessel, I would think exactly what I've already told you. It would be automating, repairing itself, but I wouldn't think of any type of weapon for it. That's other than standard weapons we already have in the game, naturally. But with the plasma weaponry, we may see extremely long-range ships and things like that. And something I'm more curious about the end of the faction, just like with the Umbra where we got the Dreadnought, and that is the 6th Umbra vessel, will we receive a Dreadnought-class ship for each tier towards the end of their tier when their final ship is released, and give the previous months before that release time for the people to collect the previous Dreadnought? If so, we may see a very powerful Dreadnought that just auto-repairs out of combat, or its overdrive, or any of their overdrives, could have a passive buff for their shielding, as well as increased damage versus the Umbra. There are so many possibilities that could occur with the next faction to counter the Umbra but be countered by the Altarians, such as the Altarians do increase damage, they have very excellent plasma resistance and things like that. And my guess is, as I said before, I believe that they're going to buff the Umbra faction so that they do an increase of damage to the new tier and things like that. Now, precisely how the new tier will be introduced, well, we kind of have their introduction here, provided this isn't just some random thing that was come up with, and this actually is introduced in the new tier as machines. Then that means that there is a very strong possibility that if we step back to the Altarian tier, very specifically to Klavik and Nyata's father, does anyone remember what occurred and what happened to him? About him uploading himself to artificially made planet-sized station that Nita destroyed using the planet destroyer that she was building in our sectors. An artificially created planet, let's say it's the size of Earth or something like that. If you destroy it, theoretically there would be no more of a threat from it. However, if you partially destroy it or heavily damage it and small proportions of it remain, they may have subroutines or self-preservation protocols that begin production of assault drones, things like that, and this is what we're seeing now. They just started to finally reach us, and this is the retaliation against us, and this is specifically a counter to the Umbra because they may have been the most detected vessels out here in our side of space. Now, again, these are all just guesses, and everyone that watches this video, I want you to just go ahead and just guess at what it's going to be as well. But the tier is going to boggle my mind until we at least get the first ship. Now, on that note, let's go ahead and let's take a look at the campaigns, because I want to talk about them for a minute, and I want to bring something up for everyone else. So this is also about campaigns as well, so new tier and campaigns. But it's just for a minute, and then we'll get back to the actual new tier. Okay, we're back in the campaigns tab, and we have not had an active campaign in the better proportion of 6 months now, or is it actually longer than that? Is it getting closer to 9 months at this point? I honestly can't remember. But something that they did for the Umbra faction when they were introduced, they offered the Phoenix frigate through a unique campaign, and I actually liked the idea that you could earn a ship ahead of when it was released. Now, I would love for the development team to actually rework the campaigns, make them more balanced, and add a primary progression path through the campaigns for unique ships, so, you know, ships you can't earn in strikes or anything like that, so strikes will still have their place in the game. But also offer unique, one-of-a-kind ships you can get only one of to start a new tier. So, you know, with the next tier, or the next faction that we're going to be receiving, something that I wish I had actually stayed much, much sooner than now, was that it would have been nice for them to create a campaign with a unique ship that represents the stats of the new tier. So, you know, you'll be able to get increased Umbra damage, or whatever they were supposed to be, on a specialist class ship, or something like that, that acts like whatever they want it to, whether it be a miniaturized dreadnought, battleship, cruiser, frigate, destroyer, carrier, specialist, anything. But battle cruiser on top of that. But it would have been nice for them to actually continue this trend, because when I think back to it, I earned the frigate, I played around with it for a little while, but then I got the first true Umbra ship that had the ablative armor, and that was it. I never touched the frigates again. I have one Mark V with a bunch more Mark V, well, up to Mark V credits prepared. But they weren't all that interesting because they didn't, in my eyes, represent the Umbra tier. It was just another frigate that had no shielding and had no ablative armor. That it had a great armor health, but its repair ratio could have been better. It could have had some built-in ablative, as I said before. And this is a great time for them to actually consider doing this with each tier and make a unique ship for a campaign to kickstart each new tier. And it'll be the first ship you technically can earn, but it will only be a weaker version of whatever they want. So if this tier is supposed to have plasma damage, give it a few plasma weapons, things like that. Give it the auto repair feature if they do something like that, but to a weaker degree than what you get in the actual campaign, well, the actual event for the month. Things like that. It's things like these that interest me. We could have so much more in-game through the campaigns than we do currently, but unique ships would be even better in my eyes, and they could always kickstart a tier a week before the official event begins, so you have a chance to earn a single unique ship, a bunch of credits for it to fully fit it, and it comes elite by default. They could do something like this, and it would allow people like me who want to create content for the game to talk about something, go through the campaign, play it through with all of you, leave our thoughts to help them improve further campaigns, as well as take a better insight into the campaigns. And the campaigns could be a very great additional storyline for the game or preluding to the upcoming factions. And it's just that little bit of an interest that caught me. Okay. Now let's head back over to the Blueprints tab and take a look once more at the ships we currently have and their weapons, and guess at what we're going to get with the introduction of the next faction. Okay. Now we're back over here in the Blueprints tab. Let's just take a look at every single class we have of ships from Altarian all the way up through the Umbra, also counting Dreadnoughts. And let's just take a moment to talk about them. The Bastion Cruiser was initially set up to be a heavily shield-bearing battle cruiser, and yes, I'm going to refer to it as battle cruiser because when it first came out, it was just incredibly powerful. And even now it is, because it boosts the range of its cannons. It has increased damage versus cutters. It has a great overdrive, provided it doesn't die the second the overdrive activates, and it's not some type of glass cannon. The resistances by default mean that any plasma targets, or targets that deal plasma damage, you have heavy plasma armor or shielding aboard the ship, you should be able to survive for a little while against said target and take very little damage, and that's before you actually take into account resistors and things like that, of which you can equip one on the level 1 Bastion if I remember correctly. If not, someone can correct me down below in the comments section. Next up we had the Inquisitor Destroyer, and its overdrive was actually built more to deal with AI outposts because the players don't actually have walls in their bases, and it was meant for long range combat against all targets, as well as the ability to pierce through basically everything. And we all remember what happened with the bases and them just being decimated by the Inquisitor fleets just shooting from the outer side of their bases right through the entire thing because of this overdrive. And the stats on each one, they're decent, but they could be better in some ways. But in comparison to previous tiers, well, there's natural progression. And then we have the Paragon. Everybody remembers this one. The carpet nuking ship. The ship that you would load it up with the greatest area of effect, the greatest barrage overdrive, and it would just become some stupidly overpowered monster ship that just carpet nuked bases into oblivion, all while being escorted by bastions or any number of other ships that could take a hit. Cavalier cutters? What a joke. I never used them for anything, and I actually built a few Vindicators for other purposes, but never built a Cavalier because I never saw the point of them, nor their overdrive, so I'm not even going to talk about them. A Sovereign Carrier, Dreadnought, is the Altarian tier carrier, and it is by far the most interesting, but still broken, in my eyes, carrier class ship in the game, in the fact that it is allowed to equip extremely long-ranged, high-damage energy cannons. Well, beam weapons, not cannons. Cannons would be much more dangerous, because they'd be bursting you down instead of actually just burning you alive. But it also has excellent shield strength due to the 50% increase by default, and a Mark IV gets an additional shield slot, making it all the more durable in terms of shielding, and that's before you even count the armor that you have underneath the shield. And by default, it has no overdrive, and you have to actually give it a generator just to give it an overdrive, and we only ever got one overdrive for it, which was the one that boosts shield strength, which was the Altarian specialty. And it does work when you're not fighting Umbra targets or things with extremely high shield bypass. Okay, we're going to talk about the Phoenix Frigate first, being the campaign reward that everyone could have earned before the official launch of the Umbra tier. It is the in-between tier for each of your ships, well, the faction, that can be any number of things that you want it to be. It can be a support ship, a hunter, or just a cargo ship, which I would recommend using it as if you're low level that has certain level vessels. As for modifiers, we all know that it hunts carriers, and that's what it does, and upon entering a carrier support field, it gains a little bit more damage, it gains exceptionally high shield bypass, very good speed, and that's the forward speed, as well as the ability to turn much more quickly. it also has, by default, increased shield damage of 100%. So even if it doesn't activate its overdrive due to a carrier, any ships that have shielding, it will be very good at stripping that shield off. Now, I would never recommend putting it up against a Bastion, because the Bastion's overdrive, when its shield is depleted, it gains that massive damage boost and range boost. Well, it's no longer massive before, but when it was released, that was a 40% it outrange battleships, and it could reach out across the stars and just crush something to death. It also gains shield bypass and things like that. So you'd have to pick your targets for the Phoenix frigate very carefully. And in most cases, I would only ever recommend using it against low-level AI carrier fleets, just because of the boost it gains via its overdrive, as well as the resistances. Because each level upgrades it, and yes, it does get void resistance, which I still disagree with, because it's not a PvP ship, so it shouldn't have had that, period. Even if it could go up against a Marauder class carrier or anything like that. Now, as for the race, well, everyone knows what I think of it from previous videos. It's the go-to ship when you need something to take damage and also beat something down, as well as reduce the effective damage of the vessel due to its culling overdrive. Moving on to the Medusa Destroyer. I have found absolutely no major use for basing even AI targets due to this thing's overdrive, of it gaining a wall EMP that disables walls. Again, this is an utterly useless in any form of PvP, and is only viable in PvE and NPC targets, and even then it's... Everyone that has a Dreadnought, you just use the Dreadnought base, because I've shown off before what the Dreadnought does in the AI bases. Other than that, it has the same damage boost. Most of them have increased Altair damage, the standard 150% range boost, because the Destroyer increased module damage instead of cruiser damage, which is something I would like them to change and bring back. Destroyers originally had the ability, as they were mark upgrade, to increase damage versus cruisers, which I would love to see return, and the shield bypass, the natural resistance, and the lack of certain resistance due to what should counter it, and the standard stats. Finally, the Ogre Battleship. And out of all of them, I actually have been using the Ogre Battleships more and more, and I've actually been liking them because of their overdrive. Let's have a look at the Bloodlust overdrive. Every time an enemy enters its firing arc and is destroyed, it gains a buff. Now, the stacking overdrive bonus for every ship is destroyed, it can stack up to 5 times, which means it can increase its damage per second by up to 10% and up to 100% increased area of effect. So this means that they can take out large clusters of ships, and lately, since I've been fighting over the Overlord targets, the Overseer targets, and things like that, farming, I've been needing more and more battleships. I've been producing and mark upgrading them at a extremely high rate, because I want more and more of them to deal with these targets that they just swarm you, and these ships, they work extremely well destroying swarms. I only have 2 of them, and I'm averaging about 6 hours repair time on the main fleet. As for ablation, the ablative effects aren't... They're not as good as they actually are with, I believe, the cruiser. I believe it gets much more. Yeah, it gets an additional 10 over the other. And I believe that they're the first 2 that have extremely decent resistance. Well, the ability to have extremely heavy armor and maintain that armor throughout the entire fight until the ship is destroyed under its ablative armor. And thus far, every time any of my ships are destroyed, they always have ablative on top of them, and they are destroyed under it. Which is... it's insane due to how long you can farm with them due to that effect. Okay, finally it's time to talk about the Manticore Battle Cruiser, which is just a cutter that's been renamed. Not going to talk about the stats, let's talk about the Blood Rush. Because I have a few of them, but I still have no major use for them, and it seems more like it's just another version of a frigate with cutter movement speed and things like that. As an enemy enters the kill zone within the Manticore Battle Cruiser firing arc, a rush of blood is triggered, causing terror to its prey, disrupting shields, increasing maneuverability and raw damage potential. Raw damage potential only affects targets with shielding, and it disrupts all shields, and it can actually reduce the shield's defense, if I'm not mistaken, Well, no, actually it says right here it reduces shield resistances, so it would be doing increased damage to the shield type. So if you're doing energy damage to the target, and the target has energy shields, it gets activated, it'd be doing 2% more than what it would be by default. And this improves through mark upgrades, I believe up to 10% in Mark 5. But that's about it. I want everybody to start guessing around at what the next tier is going to be. Do you think they're going to be mechanical in nature, machine vessels, if you will, with the ability to auto-repair themselves, to give us a feature that we've been asking for a while, but for a specific tier? Do you think that we should get unique campaign prizes to introduce ship tiers, but the campaign should be left active 24/7 so the players can take as long as they want instead of the time-restricted rubbish that it was before, where you had extremely short time frames when if you fought the target you'd take way more repair time than your fleet could actually manage to repair and then get back into the fight? And do you all think that that type of system of the campaigns and allowing preview ships or unique ships to be earned that way to represent specific tiers should be introduced and allow for an initial group, but also have a low build requirement? This is something else I want to talk about before I actually go ahead and end the video. For the type of ships that I was actually thinking about, for them being unique, being whatever Kixeye's development team wants them to be or whatever they're allowed to make, should they have lower build requirements than the actual tier? So they would have a ship lab requirement of 10. Everything in the base should be the equivalency to require ship lab 10, ship factory 10, things like that, so it will be more accessible to everyone. So everyone can build something from the new tier, but not build everything. You'd get unique weapons from the campaign and things like that just for that ship, but you could equip them on the other ships and things like that as you unlock them because they'd be for the tier. But do all of you think something like that could be interesting enough to actually propose to Kixeye to see what they think, but not for this tier, but for the next tier? After the end of tier 7, we get to the start of tier 8. Do you all think that something like that could possibly be done? And if so, would you support the idea and actually see if Kixeye would consider doing it? The coding would be much more difficult because they would have to remove time constraints. They would have to ensure that the targets are balanced enough that the players don't take absurd repair times or lose their fleet every single time they fight, even though there would be no time constraints. You could take as long as you want. And things like that. Just let me know what all of you think of that, because I really do want to hear about it. I want to see what all of you think before we kick it over to Kixeye to see what they think. But that's going to be it for this video, everybody. Be safe out there in the void, and as always, I'll see you later.